First one asked about was number 1, so here it is. So Everett is making a concrete path X feet wide around a rectangular fish pond that measures 6 by 12 feet. Which function represents the total area of the path and the fish pond? So basically of this whole rectangle, we want the area of the path and the fish pond combined. So how do you find area of a rectangle? Area of a rectangle? Multiply what exactly? Not all the sides. Length times width. So we need to know that. And I don't necessarily know this whole length, but I do know parts of it. I know that like from here to here, it's 6 feet. I know from here to here, it's X feet. And it's X feet like all around. So from here to here, it's also X feet. So add it up. What is 6 plus X plus X? That would be multiplying. X squared would be X times X. What if I just want X plus X? No, that's you multiplying. If I just want to add them, what's X plus X? 2X. So that's going to be my expression for the length, for the width, whatever you want, but that's this side. I combine like terms and I got 6 plus 2X. On the other side, we know parts of it again, like we know from here to here is 12. And then it has the X feet all around. So like I know from here to here is X. And from here to here is X. Does that make sense? Making expressions to represent it. What's 12 plus X plus X? 12 plus 2X. So that, one of them is going to be your length, one of them is going to be your width, but you have to multiply them together now. So I have 6 plus 2X times 12 plus 2X. And you could double distribute, you could FOIL, you could box method. What do you guys prefer? Double distribute. I do think my students understand that usually the most from year to year. So what 6 times 12? 6 times 2X. And then now we're distributing this 2X that we haven't done anything with. What's 2X times 12? And 2X times 2X. X times X is, okay, so that's where the X squared comes, when we multiply X times X. And looking at my answer options, I already know which one's gonna be right, because only one of them has 4X squared in it. And that's this one. But yeah, ordinarily you combine your like terms, 12X plus 24X is 36X. And it doesn't really matter the order, as long as they're all the correct sign. So like these are all positive, these are all positive in the answer. So good there? All right, any other questions from any of the study guides? Reason I have any missing after today, at least get like one submission in like before you leave today. Sign up. Number 2 on this one. Okay, so the height in feet of a ball thrown in the air is modeled by this equation where t is time in seconds. We're going to complete the table of values. So anytime that you have a table of values and a given equation, it really shouldn't matter like what unit we're in, what the equation looks like. All you have to do is see like, are they giving me an input? Are they giving me an output? And put it in the right spot. So in this one, they're giving me all of the t values. And there's a t in my given equation. So all I really have to do is anywhere that there's a t, plug in a 0 or whatever input it wants. So first it wants a 0 plugged in for t. And the rest you can put in your calculator. Maybe not the left side, but this side that I'm boxing up. Put in your calculator. I know from doing it all day that it was 24 when you type this in. And then when you go to the next one, now we're plugging in a 1. So the left side is just notation. It's telling you that we plugged in 1 into function H. The right side is what you're putting into the calculator. And I would definitely use parentheses anytime you plug something in. You don't want it to be 581. You want it to be 58 times 1. You want it to be 1 squared times -16. Does that make sense? I want to say for this one, it was 66, but I don't remember. Okay. And then the rest you could do yourself. Now that you know, just change the number and then parentheses where the T is. So good on this one? Any others? You have a Kahoot prepared if we run out of questions to ask, but remember, like, if you don't ask before tomorrow, I guess you never know. You gotta apply all these things that are being covered in the question and now apply it to new numbers, new graphs. Yes, Emma? Okay. So a projectile is fired into the air down. Okay. So a projectile is fired into the air. The equation can be used to determine h, the height of the projectile after t seconds with the domain and range. So domain refers to all the what in a function. X's and range refers to all the what. If you have a hard time remembering that, use Dr. XY. Domain means all what the X's could be. Range means all what the Y's could be. So think about the two things being compared. We have height and time. What needs to go on the x-axis? Time. Time is almost always on the x-axis. So that should help you out, hopefully. And height will be on my y then. Reason why that's important, you have to think logically when it's asking you about reasonable domain and range. Like you have to think, what can my time be? Can my time be negative? Can I have negative seconds? Can I have decimals of a second? Like, like 2.5 seconds, is that possible? So keep that in mind too. This one does have like 0 to 3, 0 to 36, 16 to 48. So we might have to graph it and see where it starts and ends. So I'm gonna do that. I probably wouldn't type the T's. I would make that an X since it would go on the x-axis. For everything right. Okay, so here's my equation. My x's, my domain goes from 0 to 3. So that narrows me down to 2 options. And the 2 options that have the domain going from 0 to 3, one says whole numbers, the other one says all real numbers. You just said time can be a decimal. So which one allows that? All real numbers allows them. It also allows negatives, but if it says from 0 to 3, then that's my boundary. We can't have negatives in this one. But so I already know my answer off of that. The range going from 0 to 36, all real numbers, does make sense. You can't have a negative height. And the highest it does go is 36. And you can have a decimal of, it didn't tell me it's units, but you could have a decimal of a foot, of a meter. So that does make sense for the range to also be all real numbers, but from 0 to 36. So they're there. All right, other questions at all? Yes, number 4 on this one. So which, if any, eventually exceeds f of x as x approaches infinity? So see everything that you're given. F of x is what type of function? Based on how it looks or its equation is probably the best way to tell. It's exponential f of x. Because that's the one where the variable is the exponent. What type of function is g of x? Linear, because it's in the form y equals mx plus b. What type of function is h of x? Also linear. So I meant for there to be a quadratic example, but hopefully you know what it takes for something to be quadratic. What would it need to have in its equation for it to be quadratic? X squared. It can have other things like x squared minus 1, x squared plus 2x minus 1, but it needs to have at least an x squared in it to make that even. But one thing you need to know by the time you leave ninth grade is which out of these three functions always eventually exceeds the other. Just think about it. Which one, linear, exponential, or quadratic, will always exceed the others eventually? Exponential, that's something we learned, that they grow at a really fast rate because they multiply each time. So that's why. Exponential will always eventually exceed the others. So when it says which, if any, will exceed f of x, will any of them exceed f of x? Eventually? No. They might exceed it at first, but eventually the exponential always overtakes it. So for this one, the answer is neither g of x or h of x, because exponential is always the one that exceeds the others. So it doesn't mean it'll be neither on your test. Make sure you really look at it. Which one's exponential? That one should always be like the winner. And which one exceeds the others? Good on this one? Any others? Not sure there was any that wasn't covered in any of my classes. So if you want to check out the class recordings from my other classes later, I will have them all linked in the slides. But yeah, any questions from like constructive response, or the optional one? Trying to see if there was any that wasn't asked about. Everything along with that. So it's all recorded at some point. You can just go back and look through those, but any last minute questions? All right, and remember the key for the constructed response when I graded it originally, it was just based off completion. Probably want to go and make sure that your answers are right. What we're gonna do now is a quick Kahoot. Normally I make you write them down, but this time I won't. The only thing is that you do need to be actively engaged in it, actively participating. And that'll be your points for today, is you participating in the Kahoot. The winner will get a prize. I'll press start in about 30 seconds. Are the of this function, x squared minus 5x? What are the y-intercepts of x squared minus 5x? Okay, so
better accuracy, but still way too low for my liking. This, I could tell you the answer without even needing to graph it. So this equation is in standard form. We know that from standard form, you can tell the y-intercepts really clearly. And that is because it is the c in ax squared plus bx plus c. C is always your y-intercept. Or the single number, the constant, if it's in standard form, is always your y-intercept. So if there's no constant, then it must be 0. We normally don't write plus 0. So that's why the answer for the y-intercept is 0. Red, I think you're thinking of x-intercepts. But also you all could have graphed this and easily seen the answer. So no reason that it should be that low of accuracy. Do better tomorrow. Okay, what is the vertex of this function? X squared minus 5x, what's the vertex? So I don't have a way to tell the vertex when it's in standard form just by looking at it. I mean, you probably have to do some algebra for it, but probably the easiest way would be to just graph it. X squared minus 5x. And then what does vertex mean? The turning point of your graph. So yeah, Desmos can do a lot of this for you, but if you don't know what vertex means, then that's like the one thing you need to memorize, I guess, for that one. Turning point of the graph. Questions on that? Okay. So there's that. On to the next one. Does x squared minus 5x have a maximum or minimum? Does it have a minimum or a maximum? On your test, even if you have no clue what's going on, even if you don't care about your grades, pick one. Maximum or minimum. Didn't say that it could be nothing, neither, or both. Just pick one. The way that you can tell is by typing it into Desmos, or there's other ways too. But x squared minus 5x, is this my lowest point of my graph or my highest point of my graph? What would you say? So that's why it's my minimum. Maximum would be my highest point of the graph. So there's that. So relating to your vertex. Questions on that? Yeah. So does this one have a minimum or maximum? Negative x squared minus 5x. Minimum or maximum? Technically, you don't need to graph them to know that, but I would just say when in doubt, double check your answers, graph it. We changed it from a positive a value to now a negative, which we know then reflects the graph. Or you can just type it in and see. It's now the highest part of my graph, the vertex, so it's a maximum. Not gonna be the first one to be able to finish the Kahoot. What are the x-intercepts of the function? X squared minus 5x. What are the x-intercepts? Good. It can never have more than 2 x-intercepts. It could possibly have just 1 x-intercept if the vertex is on the x-axis. It can even have no x-intercepts. So you just have to be able to graph it, look at where it touches the x-axis. Of course, this one's different equation, but I think you get the point. X-intercepts or zeros are where it touches your x-axis. Here's the next one. Which equation best matches the graph? And this one you have options, no, you won't get options tomorrow. Which equation best matches the graph? Okay, so looking at the forms that were offered to us, what forms do we call it when it looks like that? Factored form, and we know that from factored form, it's really easy to see what? The x-intercept. So that's why if you have the x-intercepts shown on that graph for your constructed response portion tomorrow, then maybe consider starting out with factored form. So really, there's 3 different right answers for this question. You can have it in standard form, factored form, or vertex form, up to you. But if they're showing you the zeros, then I would recommend factored form. And if these are my zeros, -2 and 6, you have to give me an equation that would have that as an answer. I know we've been doing it the opposite way. Like this one in the red, you would probably tell me that my zeros are 2 and -6 really easily. But then when I ask you to give me the equation that has these zeros, that to me is hard. Just whatever you think the answer is, type it in Desmos, see, does it touch at these 3 different spots? And then if so, then you can stop, you found the right equation. But down here, the zeros are -2 and 6, we've seen that it's always like the opposite sign of those numbers that are there. This one, the zeros are 2 and -16. This one is -2 and -6, the only one that matches are given is zero. So questions on that one? Okay, so then next one. Which equation best matches the graph? Okay, so now what are all my answer options in? What form? They're all in vertex form, which again, I'm not providing you that formula, so you might want to memorize it by tomorrow. That utilizes the vertex, which is shown. And I can use that and plug it into this formula, where HK is for the vertex. So if H is supposed to be 2, I'm plugging in a 2 where the H is. If K is supposed to be a -16, I'm plugging that in. The only way you'll have something for the A other than 1 is if it's inverted, which it's not, and if it looks like wider or more narrow from the parent graph. So once you have like this setup, and maybe clean up any like obnoxious symbols, like we don't write plus and negative, we just write -16. Then I would type this into Desmos and make sure that it also has zeros here. And then if it doesn't, I either plugged in my vertex wrong, or maybe there is an A value and you just need to figure out what that A value is. But I think if you follow the method we just talked about, I think you'll be fine. See what it shows you on the graph, plug it into one of the forms. That should come back. Okay. And then might be our last one, will be. Okay, Bo's rock throw is shown below and John's is represented by that equation. Whose rock hit the ground first? Okay, so few options. You have John's as the equation. And you could graph it and then compare where it touches the x-axis to where this one does. Because if my y-axis would be like height, then when the height is 0 would be the ground, right? So this is Bo's here. When did his hit the ground? At 1 second. When did John's hit the ground? At 1.25 seconds, because we know like in factor form, it's really easy to see our zeros. So one of the zeros is 1.25. This one over here, we could follow that pattern we talked about before when it's like two numbers, but regardless, it ends up being negligible because it's negative. So when you're comparing, yeah, Bo's hits first, and his hits at 1 second. And John's hits at 1.25. Questions, comments, concerns? All right, test tomorrow, so make sure you're ready. Ask your questions ahead of time, email me if you need to.
But everything's been covered, except for maybe this one, but it's fine.